Hello everybody, we are starting off the year of 2025 and starting off this channel talking about the 98 books that I read in 2024. I have got my coffee, I've got my notes. I had to come prepared for this video because 98 books is a lot. It is the most I have ever read in a year, but especially since getting back into reading several years ago, this is the most I've ever read in a year. Originally, my goal was to read 50 books in the year of 2024, but I didn't know what kind of reading mood I was going to be in, and I ended up hitting 50 books in May. So I upped my goal and decided that I would go for 100 books, and I almost got there, but in December with the holidays and everything else, there was just too much going on, and I just made my peace with it. I decided 98 books was totally fine. It was really good, actually. For the most part, I am gonna go in like a chronological order of how I read them last year, but I may switch up a couple different things in the order whenever it comes to series, because I might just group those together and talk about them as a whole. I've got my reading journal where I have all the books that I read written out with their ratings. So we're just gonna start at the top with the first book. That was House of Earth and Blood. It was, of course, a reread of the Crescent City series that I started out the year with, and I gave the book 5 stars. I do think the first time I read it, I gave it 4 stars, but on the reread, I was able to appreciate more of that story, so I did bump it up to 5 stars. Then I went in and I started reading the Percy Jackson series. I read Percy Jackson and the Lightning Thief. It is the first book in the series, and it's the first time I've ever read the Percy Jackson books. I gave it 4 stars. It was really good, and I did end up reading a couple more of the Percy Jackson books. I read the second one, which was Sea of Monsters. I gave it 3.5 stars. Didn't love it as much as the first one, but I did like it more than the third book, Percy Jackson and the Titan's Curse. That one I gave 3 stars, but the story is definitely for middle school, young adult. So I don't love it, but I'm so intrigued by it. I decided to also reread the Hunger Games series, but I had reread the first book in 2023, right at the end of the year. So I read Catching Fire in January of last year. I gave it 4 stars. Catching Fire is good. I think Catching Fire might be my favorite book in the series, and later that month I did read Mockingjay. I did give Mockingjay 4 stars as well, but I have a harder time reading Mockingjay, to be completely honest, and I think that's because of some of the things that Peeta deals with in that book. I do think Catching Fire is my favorite. Then I read The Brothers Hawthorne. I gave that 3.5 stars, but I'm gonna be honest, I remember practically nothing from that book. I remember practically nothing. And because of that, I have contemplated lowering the rating that I gave it to a 3. But I just don't really care about the characters that are involved in this little spin-off series. So much so that I didn't even pick up the next book in the series until December. So that was in January that I read The Brothers Hawthorne. And then in December, I read The Grandest Game, and I gave it 3 stars. And again, it's the same feeling of I just don't care about these characters. But I love the Inheritance games and that original trilogy. So I'm probably still going to read the next book. In fact, I already own Games Untold, which is the next book. So I'll get to it at some point. In January as well, I finished up my reread of the Crescent City series. So I read House of Sky and Breath. And then I read House of Flame and Shadow, which was the new release for Sarah J. Maas that came out in 2024. House of Sky and Breath, again, a reread, 5 stars. Probably my favorite book in the Crescent City series. And then House of Flame and Shadow, I gave it 4 stars. But if I'm being completely honest, I don't know if it's a 4 star. I wasn't completely satisfied with the book. By the time we start getting to the end, it felt predictable to me, and I would consider lowering that 4 star rating, but I'm not really sure where exactly I would lower that to. So for now, I'll just leave it. For some reason, talking about my ratings on books in this kind of format is making me a little nervous. Maybe it's because I don't know how everyone else is going to feel. But I'm trying to be completely honest. I'm trying to let you guys know what books I really enjoyed, what books I did not really enjoy. The next book I read was a Lynn Painter book. It was Betting on You, which is a young adult book of hers. I liked it. Betting on You was really good. But I will say, sometimes I kind of question like what age the young adult is intended for, because the language is a little bit more than what I would expect in a young adult book. With that said, I gave it 4 stars. I enjoyed the story. I thought it was really fun. And then I went on to read A Not So Meet Cute, which is by Megan Quinn. I did not love that book. I gave it 3 stars. 3 stars and no other feelings towards it. I just felt meh. Then I went into one of my favorite series, like probably one of my favorite like up and coming series, which was I read Done and Dusted by Lila Sage. She now has 3 different books out in this series, and I really enjoyed the first book. And then I read the second book when it came out later. Swift and Saddled came out in April, and I read it. I gave it 4 stars. So I did rate both of them 4 stars, but I do think I enjoyed Done and Dusted more. I have bought the 3rd book in the series because it has since come out as well. I just haven't read it yet. I haven't gotten to it. A lot of people are saying that the 3rd book is their favorite. So I'm anticipating enjoying the 3rd one. I just haven't gotten around to it yet. I'm realizing now I accidentally skipped a book that I read back in January, and that was Counting the Cost. That book is by Jill Duggar. She's talking about some of the issues that she had growing up in her family and some of the issues with having grown up on television and like the financial issues her family dealt with her father kind of controlling their money. I found it extremely interesting. Now, I don't rate nonfiction books like this, but I really enjoyed it. And it's a book that if you are interested in the Duggar family and in that whole dynamic, then I will highly recommend it. I then decided to read a classic, which I haven't really done before other than things that were assigned when I was in high school. I read Pride and Prejudice. I tried to read the physical book and I was struggling. So I listened to the audiobook, and as someone who listens to audiobooks, I typically put them on like a 2x speed and just fly through them. I couldn't do that with Pride and Prejudice. I had to listen to it on 1x speed, really soak in all the old English, but it was really good. Again, 4 stars. It was amazing, and I actually had never seen the movie for Pride and Prejudice, so I watched the movie afterwards and I loved it. So now it's one of my favorites. It did make me want to read more classics. After reading Pride and Prejudice, I went into reading Bride. Complete opposite side of the spectrum on what books are, but I read Bride by Ali Hazelwood. Here's the thing, either you loved it or you hated it, and I hated it. I did not like it. Something that happened in the book, and if you read it, you probably know what I'm talking about, made me uncomfortable when it came to the spicy scenes. Anyways, moving on. I read Ruthless Vows. Ruthless Vows is the 2nd book. I have it somewhere right here on my shelf and I'm probably overlooking it. Oh, right here. It's up here at the top. Ruthless Vows is the 2nd book in the duology for Divine Rivals, and I was let down. I read Divine Rivals towards the end of 2023, but it took me almost 3 months. It took me just about 2-3 months to pick up Ruthless Vows after I bought it and read it. I wrote here 4 stars. I'm not gonna lie, I'm gonna drop that to 3. I was really let down by the characters. It took 2 characters and the relationship that I loved and just made it really flat and really bland. After that, I decided to reread the entire, where is it? Oh my gosh. The entire Cruel Prince trilogy. I think it is, yeah, it's down here on this shelf. I reread the entire trilogy and I loved it just as much as I did before. I gave Cruel Prince, 4 stars. The Wicked King, 4 stars. And The Queen of Nothing, 4 stars, which is the same rating I gave it the first time I read the books. The world is amazing, and I wanted to do the reread because I realized I had never read The Lost Sisters, so I read that one as well in March, which is just a little novella. That one, I wrote down 4 stars. I don't remember it. Let's drop that to 3 stars. I don't remember it. I'm sure that when I read it, I was like, oh, this is great little bits of information that I wish I would have had the first time I read it. I couldn't tell you what was in that book. But I reread The Stolen Heir, which is the spin-off duology, also in the same world that is based on their brother, Oak. I gave that 4 stars. But the second book in that series came out, and I read it. That one was called The Prisoner's Throne. Again, 4 stars. So basically the entire Folk of the Air series and the spin-off duology, it's all 4 stars for me, except for maybe that novella. I was really on my reread game in early 2024 because I decided to also reread A Court of Mist and Fury. I had reread the first A Court of Thorns and Roses book back in the end of 2023. And so I read A Court of Mist and Fury in March, and I gave it 5 stars. It was a reread. It was so good. I loved it. And if you love that series, that book is probably one of your favorite in the series. And then I read Five Survive by Holly Jackson. And it was actually my first Holly Jackson book. I gave it 3.5 stars. I expected to like it more, but I think that there was just one character in that book that I hated so much that I couldn't even enjoy the book because I hated him so much. And maybe that is a testament to Holly Jackson's good writing, honestly, but it affected my desire to read the book because I did not want to read about that character. The book itself, the story, crazy good. It's about these kids who go on a road trip and they get trapped in their RV, and there's like an assassin situation going on outside. So they're trapped inside their RV. They cannot leave. They cannot drive off. They can't do anything. And then I read Lightlark and Nightbane in March, at the end of March and beginning of April. Lightlark, I gave 4.5 stars. Nightbane, I gave 5 stars. Nightbane was the first 5-star in 2024 that was not a reread. The giddiness I had after reading Nightbane was insane. So much so that when the 3rd book was set to come out in November, I reread Lightlark and Nightbane in November to prepare for the release of Skyshade, which was the 3rd book. And in my reread, I gave Lightlark 5 stars and I gave Nightbane 5 stars. But when I read Skyshade, I gave Skyshade 3.75. And I think that's an accurate rating, to be honest. Maybe 3.5, but 3.75 just to be on the positive side, because I was really, really looking forward to this book after the ending of Nightbane. But I was expecting this to be a trilogy, and it's now been extended into what I think is like 5 books. So there wasn't this like sense of resolution that I was expecting in Skyshade. I kind of felt unsatisfied after reading it. Then I also decided to continue on with my Harry Potter reread. I had started reading the Harry Potter books in 2023, and I got the first 3 of them read in 2023. In 2024, I picked up in March on Goblet of Fire, and I gave Goblet of Fire 4.5 stars, and that surprised me because I am someone who grew up watching the Harry Potter movies, so I knew the story, and I've always thought Goblet of Fire was my least favorite movie. And when I got to that book, I was like, okay, we're picking it up. The stakes are getting higher, and I just really, really enjoyed it. I did actually finish the Harry Potter series in 2024. So, book 5, The Order of the Phoenix, I gave it 4.5 stars as well. I read it in June. And I read Half-Blood Prince in September, gave it 5 stars. It was the first 5-star of the series. And then I read Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows. Read that in November and gave it 5 stars. So the series progressed in ratings, in my opinion. And by the time I got to the end, by the time I got to like the 4th or 5th book, I was crying in every book afterwards. After that, I actually decided to read Icebreaker. I had not read Icebreaker or any of Hannah Grace's books. So I read Icebreaker in April and then decided to read Wildfire in June. Icebreaker, I gave 4 stars. Wildfire, I gave 3.5. I did end up buying Daydream, the 3rd book in the series, when it came out, but I have not read it yet. I've kind of started it on an audiobook, but I'm not in the mood to get into it right now. But I enjoyed Icebreaker more than I expected to, because I'm someone who doesn't read romance for spice. So when people were talking about, oh, it's so spicy, it's so whatever, I found the story between her and her ice skating partner to be really interesting. That's what I was holding on to. That's what I wanted to know was going to happen. Wildfire, I just didn't enjoy the female character all that much. Yeah, that's really all I can say. Next, I decided to read Little Fires Everywhere. I had heard really good things about this story, especially because it's in like Reese Witherspoon's book club, and then they made a show out of it, which I have not watched yet. I will say that. Maybe I would enjoy the show more than I enjoyed the book, but I gave the book 4 stars. I would drop it down to 3.5 because I was kind of bored, to be completely honest. I did like the way that all the little things tied together, and at the very end I understood like the title of the book, but it was okay. I read probably one of my favorite books of the entire year, and that is Just for the Summer by Abby Jimenez. This was my first Abby Jimenez book, and now I am going to have to read all of her other ones because everyone says, yeah, Abby writes good books, and I'm like, well, why have I not known this? The male main character in that book was so good. They meet each other through Reddit, which is random. After that, I decided to read Me Before You because apparently I felt like crying. And I read the book, I cried, I gave it 5 stars. I love Me Before You, the movie, and it's basically the exact same as the movie, if I'm being completely honest. But something I didn't know is that there are books after Me Before You that kind of continue on the story from Louisa's point of view. And I read the 2nd book in that series. I didn't continue on because I haven't found the 3rd one, but the 2nd one is called After You. I read that one in May and I gave it 4 stars. Really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed hearing about her and how she's dealing with grief, how she is dealing with finding herself. And I think that story is extremely impactful in a way that I honestly wasn't expecting. After that, I read a book that was recommended to me by my mother-in-law. She read it in her book club. It is called Before We Were Yours, and it's based on true events, but it is not a true story. It made me cry. It made me very emotional, especially as a mother. I gave it 3.5 stars. Then I went on to read Happy Place. Happy Place is a book that I bought in December of 2023. My version of Happy Place is a signed copy, and I kept putting it off because I had heard so many people loved the book. I was scared I wasn't gonna like it, but it might be my favorite Emily Henry book. I loved the banter. I loved the story because it's kind of like a second chance romance. I loved it. It was beautiful. And since we are talking about Emily Henry, in May, towards the end of May, I read Funny Story, which was her new release this year, and I also gave it 5 stars. But even though they're both 5 stars, I still would place Happy Place above Funny Story. Emily Henry is amazing. Then I read The Things We Leave Unfinished, which was my first Rebecca Yarros contemporary. I guess it's contemporary. It's like a military romance. It's not that contemporary because it's historical, like a historical romance. I bawled my eyeballs out, and to the point that I posted a picture of me crying on my Instagram story and tagged Rebecca Yarros in it and told her that this was her fault, and she liked it and shared my picture, which was amazing. But I was like, girl, you need to know how much this is hurting me. Then I reread Powerless by Lauren Roberts in anticipation for the novella in that story, Powerful, that came out in May as well. Powerless was a reread. I gave it 5 stars. It was one of my favorite books that I read in 2023. So I was very excited to reread Powerless. Read Powerful, gave it 3.75 stars, which I feel like is a pretty good rating for a novella, especially one that is so teeny tiny. Like, even the book itself is small. And I knew that the next book in the series, Reckless, was going to be coming out just a few months after that. I felt like Powerful was a great little story to tie us over until Reckless came out. And when Reckless came out in, I think it was July, I read it. I gave it 4 stars. I don't know if it's 4 stars. I don't know. It might be 3.75. I felt comfortable with my 4-star rating on Reckless until I read Dance of Thieves in December. And if you know where I'm going with that, you know where I'm going with that. But I will go ahead and mention Dance of Thieves. I gave Dance of Thieves 4 stars. It might be 4.5. I wrote that down here. It might be 4.5. I loved Dance of Thieves. It has been noted by a lot of people that Reckless took some inspiration from Dance of Thieves. Heavy inspiration, I would say. And I just feel like Dance of Thieves did it better. Moving on, I read The Perfect Marriage, which I am new to getting into thrillers. Reading The Perfect Marriage, I was devouring it. I gave it 4 stars. Then I read With Any Luck, which was a short story, and it was good. I am going to be completely honest, I remember basically nothing about it. But I remember enjoying it and having a fun time, which is why I gave it 4 stars. We'll just leave it at 4 stars. I just honestly don't remember anything of it. After that, I read A Good Girl's Guide to Murder, which I was so excited to read, and now I really understand the hype behind it. And I gave A Good Girl's Guide to Murder 5 stars. I even read the second book, which is called Good Girls Bad Blood or Good Girl Bad Blood. And let's see, I gave that one 4 stars. They also came out with a series on, I think it was Netflix, for The Good Girl's Guide to Murder. I watched it with my husband, and when it ended, he was like, "That's it? I need to know what happens." I was like, "Yes, you'll have to wait for the next season." Then I read Just Some Stupid Love Story, which that book was given to me. Let's see. It was given to me as an ARC. I received it in the mail. I think I won it through a Goodreads giveaway. I read this book and gave it 3.5 stars. I really enjoyed the premise. It's about 2 people who run into each other at their high school reunion, and then they make a bet that on who will be together at their next reunion, including themselves. I love that plot. I love that premise. That sounds amazing. I feel like the execution didn't hold up to what I felt it should. I read Yellowface. Yellowface was a wild ride. It's so crazy to read a book where you are in the main character's head and you kind of hate her, but you're also in a way understanding her. She's making these decisions and they're bad decisions, but because she's rationalizing them and because you are reading them from her point of view, you're like, yeah, girl, that makes sense, even though it's a terrible decision. I reread Throne of Glass, and I love Throne of Glass. It's probably my favorite Sarah J. Maas series, and I know that is a hot topic, but it's young adult, and it's good young adult. I gave Throne of Glass 5 stars, and then I also reread Crown of Midnight a little bit later in the year. Gave it 5 stars. A lot of people don't love Crown of Midnight, apparently. Crown of Midnight is one of my favorite books in the series. And then I moved on to reading Home is Where the Bodies Are. I was on a thriller kick. So I read Home is Where the Bodies Are, which I really, really enjoyed. And I really recommend this book whenever people ask about reading thrillers. Plus, the book is gorgeous. It looks like a VCR tape. It even has kind of a matte, I would say textured finish. It's about these kids who come home to clean out their mother's house after she passes away. They find a VCR tape, and it's of their parents hiding a dead body. Next, I read a parenting book, because yes, I have a child. I have a 3-year-old daughter, and I read a book called Oh Crap, Potty Training. And it's nonfiction. I'm not giving it a rating, but I didn't love some of the like parenting advice she gave in there. That was not for me. But when I pushed all that aside and I just focused on her potty training advice, it was amazing. I potty trained my then 2.5-year-old in a week. After that, I read Before Us. And this book packed an emotional punch that I was not ready for. I gave Before Us 4.5 stars. It was beautiful. I cried at like 20% in. Another book that I would highly recommend is Tom Lake. I listened to this book on audiobook, and in the audiobook, it is read by Meryl Streep. It was beautiful. I felt like I was listening to Meryl Streep tell her life story. I gave it 5 stars. Highly recommend, especially the audiobook. I think if you're gonna read the book, listen to the audiobook. And I did a reread of Assistant to the Villain. I gave it 5 stars, which I think I gave it 5 stars initially with the first time I read it, but I read it again because the second book came out in August, which is Apprentice to the Villain. I gave Apprentice to the Villain 4.5 stars. Now, I have not reread it since it came out. I think maybe I would say it's closer to a 4-star, but I might change my mind after rereading the book. So I would say I feel like that's one that I'm going to need to reread, especially before the third one comes out. Then I read Normal People. And the thing about Normal People is that I know people either love it or they hate it. And I was kind of expecting that I might not like it, but I gave it 4 stars. I thought it was a super intriguing story, especially given that it is kind of just a story of, for lack of better words, normal people. Then I read A Little Life. I don't have thoughts on this book that are kind. It was pitched to me as, read this super emotional book. It's not emotional, it is traumatizing. And I mean that in the most serious way possible. This book actually put me into like a depressive state. That book hurt me. And I'm sure that that is what the author was intending, but I went into it blind because I thought, well, if I read all these trigger warnings, it's going to spoil the book for me. I wish I would have spoiled the book for myself. I wish I would have read those trigger warnings and not read the book. I did not give that book a rating because I can't rate it highly and that seemed like I'm recommending it, and I can't rate it low because it did have an emotional impact that I think the author was intending. So I just have no idea how to rate that book, so I'm just not going to rate it. Then onto a book that is completely different. I read a young adult romance. I read Check and Mate by Ali Hazelwood. I gave it 4 stars. It's probably one of the more enjoyable Ali Hazelwood books that I have read, because there have been some of her books that I have not enjoyed. I'll go ahead and mention another one of hers I read this year. I read it in December, and that was Love on the Brain. I had kept putting it off. I gave it 3.5 stars. I just felt meh about it. That's the only way I can describe it. There was a trope in that book that I didn't love, which is the trope where the guy kind of like pours his heart out to the girl and he's like, I've loved you for all this time, I've cared about you for all this time, and she just still kind of looks at their relationship as just being temporary. And I'm like, girl, he just told you he loves you. Why are you acting like this is a fling? I don't love that. Then I read 1984, and that's a book that my husband has been trying to get me to read since years before we were even dating. I gave it 3.75 stars. I think on Goodreads I marked it as 4 stars. I would say it's closer to 3.75. I found it extremely interesting. Maybe it's because, it is a classic book. So maybe, at the time that it was written, it was super radical. But at this time, I feel like so many things have been based on similar premises, based around that book and around Big Brother especially. I mean, there's a TV show about it. I just felt like 3.75 was the best I could do. Next, I read Out on a Limb, which is by Hannah Bonham Young, I'm pretty sure. I gave it 5 stars. I ate that book up. I listened to it on an audiobook in one day. It does have a pregnancy trope, but I feel like it is the best pregnancy trope that you could possibly put in a book. Next is a book that honestly I don't think was necessary, and that is If Only I Had Told Her. I gave this book 3 stars. Honestly, I might give it 2. It just felt like it wasn't needed. I think people loved the first book so much that they just begged and begged and begged the author to give us more. And then she gave us more, and then we all read it and we said, we could have gone without that. After that, I read Sorcery of Thorns in August, and I gave that 3.75 stars. I might round that up to 4, to be completely honest. That story was really good, and it's a standalone young adult fantasy, which I feel like is almost impossible to find. A standalone fantasy is so hard to find, and this one was a good one. Then I read King of Wrath by Anna Huang, and I gave that 4.5 stars. I have tried to continue on with that series and have thus far soft DNF'd King of Pride. I just wasn't into that one like I was the first one. The first one I kind of just devoured. Even as someone who doesn't like to read a ton of spice, I found the dynamic between the male and female character like super interesting because it is like a forced marriage. Then I did a reread of The Summer I Turned Pretty, and I did a reread of the second book in that series, which is It's Not Summer Without You. I have read those books every summer now for I think, including this 2024, I think like the last 3 summers. I gave The Summer I Turned Pretty 4 stars, and I gave It's Not Summer Without You 4 stars, which I think I did lower my ratings on those from the initial time that I read them, but they're still amazing books. Then I read The Unhoneymooners, which is by Christina Lauren. I actually have it right here, and I gave it 3.75 stars. I really enjoyed it though. Like, it's a positive 3.75 stars. It might even be 4 if I'm being honest. And there was a audiobook exclusive short story that they put out afterwards, and that one is called The Honeymoon Crashers. I gave that one 4 stars. I think that one actually was better than the first book. Like, I think the audiobook was something like 5 hours. I finished it in a night while I was baking a cake. It was really easy to listen to, and I really enjoyed the male main character in that audiobook. After that, I read When the Moon Hatched. And let me tell you something. I have not read a book that I enjoyed so much, but that I can honestly not explain the book to you possibly ever, or at least since trying to explain Crescent City to people. Trying to explain this book to somebody is a billion times more difficult. There's a glossary in the beginning, and that's when you know you're getting into some tough fantasy. I gave this book 4 stars, and I'm going to reread it before the next one comes out because I am really anticipating loving where the story goes on to. Next, I decided to read Little Women. So back on my classics train, I read Little Women. I own a copy of it, but something I didn't realize is that my copy is only like the first half of the story. So I read Little Women, and then I had to read Little Women Part 2, which I think used to be called maybe Little Men. I gave the first one 4 stars, the second one 4 stars. So 4 stars overall. The second part had me crying, and it's because I related to quite a bit of it as a mother. I had not watched the new Little Women movie, so I watched that afterwards, and it's gorgeous. Next, I read Flawless, which was the first book in the Chestnut Springs series. 3.75 stars. Wasn't my favorite in the series because I did go on to read more from that series. I read Heartless, gave Heartless 5 stars. I ate Heartless up. Yeah. Powerless, and I gave Powerless 4 stars. A book that packed an emotional punch for me was A Man Called Ove. I can't remember how it was pronounced. I gave that 5 stars, and I was crying. That book, I have thought about that book almost every single day since I read it. And it had me evaluating my life, evaluating the way I think about people, evaluating everything. There is a movie with Tom Hanks, and we're going to be watching that soon because this story is beautiful. Another nonfiction book that I read was Beyond the Wand, which is by Tom Felton. I loved it, especially as someone who just got through the Harry Potter series and as someone who grew up watching Tom Felton in the Harry Potter movies. The information he gave me on the background, but also the information we got from his life, I love it. And I think about the stories he told in that book, every time I think about Harry Potter, every time we watch the movies, anytime it's mentioned. Next, I read The Summer of Broken Rules, which was a young adult romance book, and it was so good. I gave it 4.5 stars. Then I did my reread of Fourth Wing. I ended up doing this reread because my husband was listening to the audiobook, and he asked if I wanted to listen to it with him while we were on a road trip. And we listened to it on the drive down. We went to Disney for a couple days, and then on our drive back, we finished the audiobook together. 5 stars, of course. He agreed. He loved Fourth Wing. He said that this is probably one of his favorite books that he has read in a really long time. Then I read Nothing Like the Movies, which is kind of a continuation of Better Than the Movies, which is one of my personal favorite young adult romance books. And Nothing Like the Movies kind of felt unnecessary. Another book that had a movie that I grew up on was Practical Magic. Practical Magic, the movie, was something that I watched, I can't even tell you how many times as a kid. And reading the book, I gave the book 4 stars. And I think this is a rare situation where I think I enjoy the movie better than the book. Is that because I grew up watching the movie? Maybe. But I just feel like the movie does a good job of getting the information across in a really concise way, whereas the book kind of took you around for a while before getting to the point. Next, I read Morbidly Yours. Morbidly Yours was a romance book about a girl who went to, I think it was Scotland, and she meets a guy who works in a funeral home. The way that they were both working through grief from where she had lost her husband and where he had lost his grandfather. It was a really good and really emotional story. Then my best friend, she actually buddy read with me The Housemaid by Freida McFadden. I had heard good things about The Housemaid, but it was one of those books that I kept putting off because I was worried it wasn't going to live up to all the hype. I ended up giving it 5 stars. I loved The Housemaid, and I loved it so much that I decided to go on and read the second one, The Housemaid's Secret. I gave that one 4 stars. Didn't enjoy it as much as the first one, but I did enjoy it more than my best friend did. Next, I read 1,000 Boy Kisses. And this was a book that I went into reading thinking, oh my gosh, this book makes people cry. Be prepared. But I was over-prepared because I felt nothing. I gave it 3 stars. I didn't really care about it. Next, I read Two Can Play. Two Can Play was an audiobook exclusive Ali Hazelwood book, and I remember basically nothing about it. So I had written down that it was 3 stars. I would potentially lower that. I don't know. Then I started The Journey of a Lifetime. And this is a great place to leave off, honestly. I started reading the Addicted series by Krista and Becca Ritchie. And you guys, it's so good. It's so good. I love it so much. Addicted to You is the first book. I gave it 5 stars. Ricochet is the second book. I gave it 4 stars. And then Addicted for Now, I gave 3.5 stars, but honestly, I might give it 4 stars. I was having a hard time getting through it because of the holidays and because that it had affected how I was feeling about the book, but honestly, it was good. Since then, I have read 2 more in the series, and I'm on the 6th book in the series, and I'm just devouring it. I don't want to put it down. I don't want to stop reading it. I don't want to read anything else. Thank you so much for watching this extremely long video. I hope that from it you are able to take some book recommendations, and I thank you for watching, and I hope you guys come back in the future for another video. Bye!